Yeah.
That's the one for you.
Okay, so we had a great introduction with Sven, very much what I wanted to achieve. Now, the next panel is really, of course, a group of distinguished heads of competition agencies. These are all my friends, people I want to hear from, and of course, also Andreas Schwab, member of the parliament. Let me make a sort of a brief introduction to set the scene before I start asking questions. And I think it's important collectively to have a common understanding of where we are and why this is such an important moment and why we are having this discussion with the competition agencies. So if you take yourself back to Draghi, which landed with a thud in September, it's a diagnosis that is not new to Europeans. We know what the issue is, but he put it incredibly starkly and very well. Essentially, our economic model, as Sven was also alluding to, is one that has been premised for the last 20 years on exports. And then we get hit by a double whammy. China, which is essentially aggressively pursuing industrial policy, leaps forward, is no longer exporting just textiles and white goods, but is now really effective in producing the kind of things that Europe is best at, cars and other sort of machinery. And it has certainly introduced a major challenge to the core industrial strengths of Europe. Germany, I was alluding to a Detroit moment before because this is the kind of predicament that Germany faces. We'll discuss it further in the next panel, but this is one big whammy. The other whammy is that, of course, the US, which is our export market, is shrinking for Europe. So we are sort of caught in the middle in a situation in which we are an export market, we suppressed wages to be competitive in exports, and therefore the engine of growth is not turning. This is what Draghi says, and an economy that is permanently underheated at the level of demand at home is not going to deliver growth. So then one can say, but why is any of this relevant to competition policy? Why are we even having this discussion? Is this relevant? Competition does its thing, and we know the general approach tends to be, well, we do competition, right? Competition is what you need to stimulate growth and innovation. That is true, but again, I want to set that alongside the Draghi point that an economy which is not growing because of structural issues is not going to be suddenly spurred into growth because of competition. So we tried to have this discussion last year, and as you know, there was a comment about competition being just a side dish and having not so much to do with any of this. I want to challenge that view, and I've been doing that for the last year because I do think it's reductionist, and I do think that competition, as I said at the beginning, is an intellectual framework to think about economic policy, which is incredibly powerful. It deals with power. So what else? Let me start with this great panel, having had my own preaching. So I want to start from Benoît here. Benoît, of course, president of French Autorité. I recall a very engaging panel that you spoke at, Benoît, a couple of months ago, a post-Draghi panel in which, this was for the Center for Economic Policy Research, you were one of the first to actually acknowledge from the side of competition agencies that we either engage with this discussion or we are at risk of becoming irrelevant. And you had a number of suggestions for how one engages and how one thinks about it. So I'd like you to develop that theme, please.
Thank you very much, Cristina. Good morning, everyone. I would first like to congratulate Cristina for the choice of the titles of your conferences. Last year was about the next world order. Well, we have it. Not sure we like it, but we have it. And so the perfect storm, we will have it based on this example, and maybe we won't like it. So and it's always a great conference. Maybe we can improve a little bit the diversity dimension on the panels, but I'm sure this will happen.
I invited many women, and they couldn't. So I'll publish a list of the women who declined, okay?
Good. Name and shame. Yeah, absolutely. Look, I think what we need when entering that discussion is a little bit of a method, and I think we need to be clear on if we want to engage as competition enforcers, competition agencies, we need to agree on the principles, and then we need to agree on the method. And what I mean by agreeing on the method is about agreeing on what we can do and also agreeing on what we cannot do. And agreeing on the principles, I think it might seem obvious, but look, yesterday the Commission gave us a competitiveness compass, which is great to show the direction. Well, actually, it's a compass with 8 directions, right? So maybe we need a little bit also of prioritizing what we want to achieve. And for me, that's very simple, and it will starting with the principles. I think it echoes a lot what Sven Giegold has said a few minutes ago. That should be first about making it clear that competition and industrial policy can support each other and should support each other. And frankly, I mean, the notion that when I hear politicians saying that we need less competition to achieve our industrial policy goals, the notion that will help our companies thrive on global markets by protecting them from competition and spoon feeding them with subsidies, I'm not sure it's a service to pay our companies to do that. So if we don't have competition on our internal market, how can they succeed on the global market? I don't know. So we need competition on the internal market to make them stronger, actually. And we need to think of ways we can, as competition policy enforcers, support the industrial policy goals. That's the first thing. Second principle, which is related, it's about the single market. And I think Sven said it all, so I'm not going to say it again, but everything we do, both as competition enforcers and as industrial policymakers, should be about supporting the single market, which is Europe's best asset. And so there is a lot to say, for instance, on how industrial policy delivery can better support the single market. I'm not going to go there because that's not what you want us to discuss. But there is a lot to say about state aids going to mostly to 2 countries, which have been mentioned by Sven. So I don't have to give the names. And risks of fragmentation in the single market based on the way we do industrial policy today. And the same applies to competition, by the way. So when we do competition policy, and particularly a merger review, we should have the single market in mind. And it's very clear to me that, for instance, what Mario Draghi had to say about the telecom market, that was about strengthening the single market. And that was about allowing companies to scale up on the single market. That was not about allowing more domestic mergers, increasing the market power on single domestic markets. So for me, these are the 2 principles. And then how do we deliver? We have to make it clear that what competition can achieve and what competition cannot achieve. Because, as we know, it's not only about competition. And I think one strong point in the Draghi report, it's about moving beyond the silo approach to economic policy making and having a kind of a global vision of competition, yes, but also industrial policy, of course, but also trade policy and regulation. So there are 4 dimensions, actually. And so if we want to level the global playing field, the best instrument is trade policy. It's not competition. And we've done some way towards achieving that with the foreign subsidy regulation and the new procurement rules and so on. But let's not ask domestic competition policy to achieve what trade policy should achieve better. So it's really a question of assignment, right? And likewise, a lot can be achieved through regulation better than through competition policy. In the digital space, functional equivalence, interoperability can achieve a lot. That in a kind of broad and encompassing way that antitrust, which is case by case, will achieve in a kind of scattered and piecemeal way, right? The regulation goes into all the cracks, while antitrust is only about cases. So it's a much better instrument, and we've seen that, for instance, with the functional equivalence requirements of the Data Act, which are great competition enhancer in the cloud services space, for instance. We've seen that previously with the Payment Service Directive. Regulation as a competition enhancer, but that's regulation. That's not competition. But then also, of course, the kind of other side of the coin is that whatever we do as competition enforcers, we have to do well and seriously. And you know, my grandmother, she was trying to teach me Latin, and she very often would tell me, age quod agis, right? So if you do something, do it well. And that also applies to us competition enforcers. So, and there are a number, and we are practical guys, you know, we are not big thinker. We are practical guys. We do cases, and there are practical things we can do. We can do better to use and enforce the efficiency defenses that are already allowed under European law and national law in merger review. We never do it, so I think we should, take a pause and sit together and ask ourselves why we're not doing it. Usually that's because the cases that are put to us by companies are not good, and by their lawyers, sorry to say that, are not good enough. They're not well documented. The numbers are kind of, coming out of thin air or cut and pasted from the PowerPoint presentations to the bankers, and the commitments are probably not enforceable, and so on and so forth. So these are good reasons, but we can work on that with them and try to use the instruments that we do have in French law. We can authorize a merger which is good for economic progress, whatever that means, and the Conseil d'État has helped us already to understand what that means, and so we have clear conditions. Let's work on that and let's make it happen. Same for sustainability. I mean, Martijn has been a pioneer and a leader in that thinking. We've done good work together with the Commission on sustainability agreements and more broadly on exemptions to Article 1013. Little has been done on sustainability defenses in dominance cases. We should work on that. We haven't worked on that together, and so on and so forth. And also, as competition enforcers, I think we can play a much more productive role helping to shape out regulation. So be active in the regulatory discussion to explain industry by industry which regulation will be supportive to competition and which is not. And we do that occasionally, but we can do that on a more regular basis. My last point is about the global landscape and international coordination. There are, of course, concerns with the developments in the US. I have to say that the gentlemen and the ladies which President Trump has nominated to the FTC and DOJ, they are very reasonable and respected people. So I'm absolutely confident that we'll work very well with them. But on our side, I think we should absolutely refrain from falling in the trap of having a transactional approach to our relationship with the US. That is, having some kind of negotiation with the Trump administration case by case, one after another. Because if we fall in that trap, Europe will be stuck like a rabbit in the headlights and react to every new idea and provocation thrown away by President Trump. That's not the way we can work. We should stick to our principles, and that was said by Sven Giegold already. We should stay the enforcement course, including on DMA and DSA. and we should have a reasonable discussion with our US colleagues, which I'm sure you can have. And by the way, it's great that on this panel you have both the chair of the International Competition Network, Andreas, and the chair of the OECD Competition Committee, which is me now. And so we can use these two places to secure a strong framework for international cooperation, which we'll need. And I stop here.
Thank you so much. A number of points I'd like to pick up on. I'll return to it, but to me, of course, this last comment on the international landscape is very, very stark. Transactional approach is all you hear when you now talk about the new U.S. administration, and so how that will play out is certainly a concern. I also very much welcome your discussion of the ways in which ultimately competition needs to engage with these other issues. I completely agree that competition is not the tool through which you can achieve all sorts of goals. But I think my point, and I think this is the one I would like to continue to discuss also with Andreas, is that the fact that we cannot achieve certain goals, but it should be trade or should be industrial policy, doesn't mean that we sort of sit in a tower and do our own thing and say, trade, don't talk to the hand. I don't know what they are doing over there. Industrial policy is not my business. Or, you know, there is this approach which I think is the one that troubles me the most. Andreas, so we heard of the current turmoil in Germany. I imagine that everything, every day changes pretty much in ways that are worrying. But how does, give us your perspective on what the landscape in Germany, or the discussion, the narrative at the moment is in Germany around what you're doing, and more broadly on this question of how do we make competition policy more tightly knitted with other economic tools that we absolutely need to do the broader job.
Yeah, thank you. Cristina, first of all, thanks for having me here at your wonderful conference. This panel is not so easy because we talk about growth, we talk about industrial policy, we talk about trade. Nobody talks about entrepreneurial freedom. If you go to the business community and ask what is needed to get Europe back on track, and also Germany, they don't talk about industrial policy. They don't want industrial policy. They talk about entrepreneurial freedom. And if you look at the programs for the election on 23rd February this year, I think in the program of the Liberals and in the program of the Social Democrats, the Bundeskartellamt and competition policy is not even mentioned. If you look at the program of the CDU, there's just one line: we are going to abolish the new competition tool. That's all. You don't find anything else. So what does that mean? It means, obviously, that in a situation where we have an election, and this election is dominated for the time being by two top topics. One is migration. We're not talking about migration today. The other one is growth. Why is competition not even mentioned? It can only mean that with competition, maybe not everything is fine, but it is definitely not at the heart of what we need to do and what we need to change in this area of growth. So what do business people claim? And I think if we think of growth, it's not so much the state that is in charge of that. It's business, it's the companies. And if you ask them, they ask for freedom, entrepreneurial freedom. And if you look at Europe as it stands, and in Germany, if you take a look back at the year of 1958, when the Bundeskartellamt was founded, there was no regulation, very, very little. There was a tiny competition law with very few competences. There was a competition agency with 58 people, and Ludwig Erhard whistled the game for the German industry. Show me the policymaker today who says we start that without any regulation, just with a very slim competition regime and a very slim agency. I mean, this is entrepreneurial freedom. And what happened then? I think we added one layer of regulation and bureaucracy after the other. And you can do that, of course, for a certain period of time. You can do that for a long time. But we have added layer after layer, even more layers in recent years. If you look at the last 3 to 5 years, there have been many new layers of bureaucracy and regulation. And as everything in life, everything is poisonous. It's only a question of the doses. And I think these layers of regulation have reached kind of a tipping point. And we are beyond this tipping point probably now. Maybe this is not just my opinion, or this is not my opinion. This is what you get as an answer if you ask the business community. And we have reached this tipping point now, and this is really hampering or can hamper growth in Europe. So I think this is what we need to look at, and this has a lot to do with competition in a way, because there are other areas of the world where you do not find these layers of bureaucracy, where you do not find these layers of regulation. So again, if you ask the business community, we have to do a lot of work on that. And if again you ask how to cure this situation, they ask for corporate tax reforms, they ask for better education. In Germany, 20% of the kids leaving elementary school at the age of 10 have problems in calculating, reading, and writing. A severe problem for growth in the coming years. Companies ask for less bureaucracy. And bureaucracy also has a lot to do with competition. If you look at GDPR, GDPR has become a booster for big tech. Because big tech can apply GDPR and they can tell everyone, come to me, yourself, you're safe. I apply GDPR in the right manner. Something that small and medium-sized companies cannot say. I'm a little bit afraid that with the AI Act, we might go in a similar direction. At least small and medium-sized companies already claim they cannot, or it will be difficult for them to apply the AI Act because they have problems with that. Again, that plays from a competitive point of view into the hands of the big ones. Another thing about AI, also here in Europe, we regulate. In the US, Donald Trump calls for a huge program, Stargate, 500 billion euros. In Germany, at the same time, the headline is 130 new staff for the Federal Net Agency to regulate the AI Act. Who will do better in the future? Well, we will see. I don't know if this is really the way forward. I think also that Draghi is right, that something has to happen in certain areas. Look at telecoms, for example. But also here, the way forward is definitely not to have more national mergers in telecoms. The thing is to end the fragmented regulation that we face in Europe in order to allow for cross-border mergers. I think this is what is desperately, in a way, needed. Why do Vodafone and Deutsche Telekom have, I think, 10 subsidiaries in Europe, in all these countries? It's not because of a lack of competition, it's because of the fragmented regulation. The same is true for the Capital Markets Union, towards we are working since decades, but which is not happening, leading to the fact that startups are founded in Europe and they grow in the US. Why? Because the pool for money, the pools, I must say, because they are fragmented pools of money in various member states, are too small. And we must enlarge these pools. So what I want to say is, we do not have to do additional work on competition. We do not need reforms on competition law. We need reforms in many areas in Europe and in Germany towards regaining entrepreneurial freedom in order to regain the capability to innovate and to bring this innovation to the street, to make it work, to make it happen also for the people. I think this is what is key. And in this scenario, I just wanted to say, as my final word, I think competition agencies have a very bright future. Because it will be up to us, like in the past, to keep markets open, to reduce switching costs. For example, if you switch from one cloud to the other, more important than ever, to keep markets open for newcomers. So this is the key issue that we need to do. So in a nutshell, we have to change a lot of things in other areas, but I think we should not change competition law, and competition law is really not at the core of the reforms that we need in the future. Maybe we have to explain it better. I think this is a fundamental point, that we explain to the people what we are doing, why it is for the benefit of consumers, of people, why it is useful for consumers. This is not about the change of competition law. By the way, very well described in the recent report by the European Union, by DG Comp on protecting competition in a changing world, that is reporting very well about the effects of competition and that competition has to the benefit of consumers.
So multiple points to pick up there, and just to touch on the last one. I think that the issue, I agree, is certainly not further changes to competition law. I hate to say this to this community, but that's why I'm bored to tears with discussions about 102. 102 cases are few and far between, and one needs to ask, what do they actually achieve on the ground? And I will submit that the selection of cases and the progress of these cases is so slow and ineffectual that, frankly, to have another discussion of paragraph, whatever it is, and wording of 102 is beside the point. I agree with Andreas that much of this is really sex of angels kind of discussion that the community engages in ways that I find maddening. That said, also the call for a more entrepreneurial sort of understanding of what drives business is well understood, and it's a well-made point. I will continue, though, to pursue this quest with Martijn, because it is true that, and I think we emphatically agree, competition policy is not what needs to drive growth. That said, I think that what Draghi puts in front of us is the question, well, how do you contribute to the mission in a concrete way as competition policy enforcers? And frankly, we don't need to discuss that today in detail, but it isn't fanciful to see that governments and politicians, when they think progress isn't really being made fast enough, we are not, and we are facing decline and fear, just turn around and say, who is the turkey with the tallest neck? I'm gonna just cull that. This is what happened in the UK, right? The UK government has just replaced the chair of the competition authority with a more growth-oriented personality. So this is not fanciful. It is happening in real life. The politicians and the governments are looking around for culprits and for people to blame and for scapegoats. Rightly or wrongly, but this is a sign that competition policy, competition enforcement is in the mix and is in the spotlight. So, Martijn, over to you. Of course, you come from a small open economy, and one of the big sort of themes of the Draghi report has been lack of scale for European companies. We are lacking scale, and that has been taken as an invitation to favor mergers, which I think is a misread of what Mario Draghi says. But you have thought quite a lot about this issue of scale. You have success companies like ASML, global success in the Netherlands. What is your take around all these issues?
Yeah, thank you very much, Cristina. Your earlier comment about the scapegoat and whether competition authorities are becoming the scapegoat, I think that's a fair point, and also something that we have to take serious as competition enforcers. But I'm not so sure whether it's actually competition enforcement that is the scapegoat, but maybe it's competition that is the scapegoat. And that reminds me of when I started in office in 2018, it was not productivity and growth that was high on the agenda, but it was sustainability. And there, competition was the cause against sustainability. And competition stood in the way of a more sustainable economy. At least that was the narrative that was promoted by many companies and by many politicians on the left side. I've always opposed that, because I've never believed that competition stood in the way of a more sustainable economy. And the same now. Competition does not stand in the way of growth, and we shouldn't fall into that trap and into that narrative. Competition spurs growth and productivity. We need competition. And the same thing goes and that goes to your point about ASML, is the obsession with mergers, as if mergers are the only way to growth. And that is a false narrative. And ASML is a fantastic example. It's one of Europe's global leaders. It's the pride of the Netherlands. And it's a fantastic company that was developed virtually without any merger. It's a global leader in its field of technology. Yes, there were a few mergers, but how did it achieve? And it's important to tell this story, because it's not only a Netherlands success, it's a European success story. ASML has a fantastic ecosystem of suppliers around Europe. It works together with important suppliers, key suppliers in Germany, key suppliers in France, not through mergers or vertical integration or horizontal integration, but by very tight contractual relationships. And that's an important theme, and that the talk and the discussion and the amount of intellectual energy that's being put in reforming the merger policy misses the point. The point is that we need growth and that we need an entrepreneurial spirit. I fully agree with Andreas's point, but that is not through abolishing the current merger policy. The merger policy, neither competition, stand in the way of growth. That doesn't mean that we can sit back and relax as competition enforcers. We have to do something, and competition enforcement can help. And if you look at the history of competition enforcement, it changes its tune from time to time to the things that are necessary in society. When our focus was very much on sustainability over the past few years, fully understand, because that was one of the key issues in society. If now society changes, and I think, well, we need to slightly change the policy focus on growth, we as competition authorities also have to move with that tide. And there are certain things we can really do. One of the things that we communicated to the businesses, like we did with sustainability, is, listen, if you have good plans, and you need to work together with a competitor, and you are afraid of the competition laws, come to see us. Come and talk to us whether the competition laws really stand in the way of your plans for innovation. We can devote resources to that, and we are willing to do that like we did with sustainability agreements. The second thing that we can do is, we do not have the power to change the law, but we do have the power to prioritize cases and to focus our detection radars. And we have the power to allocate resources to different topics. And we as competition authorities can and should reallocate our resources to those areas that are important for productivity growth, to the choke points in the economy, to the moats around ecosystems, and try to make sure that these moats are being stopped, that these ecosystems are open, so that other companies can chip in, can benefit from the economies of scale, can innovate, and can drive growth. And that, Cristina, I don't think I agree with you that the laws do not need to change, because there is one element that we do need as competition enforcers, and that is also recommended in the Draghi report, and that is the new competition tool. And that's a kind of a broad stroke instrument, but I think fundamentally there is a change in the instruments that we need. 102 was a fantastic instrument at the time, but it is a quasi-criminal instrument. It's an instrument that looks at punishing behavior in the past, that results in liability, that results in high fines. But what we are talking here is now is sort of competition regulation. We need regulation to open up markets, to increase productivity and growth. And for that purpose, 102 is not suited. 102 is suited for those situations where there is really illegal behavior, where there is a crime, where there should be punishment. But this is not about punishment. It is not about companies behaving illegally. This is of companies protecting their business interest against the interest of society. And their competition enforcers can play a role and should have a non-punitive, non-criminal instrument to open up markets. And this is exactly what the new competition tool can provide if implemented and legislated properly. And then the final thing is what competition authorities can do, and so was also mentioned by Benoît and Andreas, is that our advocacy role. We have to become more involved in the debate about changing, rescinding laws that restrict competition and that limit productivity and growth. And I think so far competition authorities have been rather reluctant in that role, and for good reasons. I understand, because you treat into the political domain. You treat into the domain of the legislator and what is the role of the competition enforcers there. But I think we have to take that role because we are experienced market analysts. We know how markets function. We know how it works, and without a political backing and without a kind of political motives, we can, in a fairly technocratic way, look at regulations and tell the legislator, who will ultimately decide, change this, tweak that, abolish that, because that will help, and that is a voice that is usually not heard in politics. Reason why is politicians like to enact broad stroke new laws, maybe change it, replace it from old laws, but not the kind of the technocratic, nitty-gritty things that we as competition enforcers see and can act upon. So it is important to have that role. It's also something that we do now as a Dutch competition authority. We publish, starting the mid-March, annually a report on legislation that we believe hinders competition, creates unnecessary burdens for businesses, and have become obsolete. And that is important because many laws stay in the books forever. And they were well intended at the time, but as society changes, our economy is changing, they lose their relevance. And that is important for someone in the government to call that out and say, change that law. With that being said, it is important also for competition authorities to look at their position in society. I'm a member of the Church of Competition, and a believer in competition. But at the same time, competition is a tool to achieve certain objectives. Competition is not a goal in itself. And it's important to look, also when we're looking at these laws, to keep in mind that there are also other social objectives, that it is important that consumers are being protected against market power and against information asymmetry. It is important that we move into a more sustainable economy. So let us, as competition enforcers, now not become totally blindsided with other objectives that are important in our societies, but at the same time have the eye on the ball and make sure that we have a voice also in abolishing and changing regulations.
So many things to pick up from there, but let me again start from the last point. I think this notion that, yes, one cannot pursue everything under the sun through competition law, you know, you're not going to kind of end world poverty through competition law, is well taken. At the same time, I think that there is consensus that one of the great successes of enforcers like Lina Khan or Jonathan Cantor in the US has been the ability to bring competition to the masses in a way that is very touching. We will talk later to Lina, but has really engendered a great deal of some of this stuff is kitchen table stuff. It's about the real issues that people face, the choke point, the pain points in their life. So that level of, as you say, advocacy and communication is something that I think needs to be absolutely pursued. And you call it the church of competition. In my head, that's a pejorative. We are too much of a church and don't go out and explain to people what it is that we're doing for them or to business. Second point I want to pick up on, the new competition tool. I'm not against the idea of something which ends the life of one or two in many ways, because I think it's a waste of time. My only concern is, are we adding another law that is going to take ages to implement and the whole thing is going to be another bureaucratic rigmarole and it's going to take years? To Andreas's point, are we going to tell business, guess what? We got a new law, it's called a new competition tool, and they all go, yay, that's fabulous. We are all so happy to hear that. So I hear you, but I think that that is something that, again, needs to be explained. The final point, and I then want to turn to Nuno. You are right, and I completely agree. I mean, it isn't merger enforcement that is stopping scaling in Europe. This is a complete misdirection, and it is, of course, a function of lobbying. As someone who has done, for my sins, many mergers, I know very well that it isn't the case that merger control is the obstacle to scaling. There are the occasional cases that are controversial, but it isn't really. In fact, merger control in Europe is almost dead. Is horizontal. We pass everything with remedies that don't go anywhere. So, you know, let's not kind of essentially fancy that we are just so tied to merger policy that, oh my God, we are preventing the scaling of companies. I want to turn to Nuno because indeed, in some sense, against trend, you've just blocked a deal or recently blocked a deal, a telco deal in Portugal. And we don't need to go into the details of that deal, but again, this question of the telco industry has been very much in the broad discussion of Draghi. There's been a presumption that what Mario Draghi is suggesting, he's the victim of the telco lobby. He wants the telcos to merge. I think that's, again, a misread of Mario Draghi. But why don't you just elaborate on some of these points? Thank you.
Thank you, Cristina, and thank you for inviting me here. It's a pleasure to be with my colleagues and you in this panel. Before going to the telecom merger that happened in Portugal, just a few words about this competitive compass that came out yesterday at the same time as the Chinese New Year. It's the year of the snake, which means wisdom, transformation, and strategic thinking, which is to be a good omen for Europe, although we are in the middle of a storm, as the title of this conference. So in this document, the Commission defines its guiding star. The guiding star is the renewal of Europe's competitive strengths. In the wake of the Letta and the Draghi reports, the Commission is setting the tone for action, claiming among others the need to fill the innovation gap and to fully exploit the benefits offered by our vast single market by removing barriers to its functioning. By doing so, the Europe's Compass aims to unleash the EU potential, namely supporting companies scaling up in European and global markets while ensuring a level playing field. So I think that the limits of scaling up can be found precisely at this point, the level playing field. So does scale actually live up to the promise of growth, or does it create new barriers? This is exactly where competition policy steps into the spotlight. Indeed, as you told Cristina, competition policy is a powerful economic tool. Still, the truth is that the merits of competition are often underestimated. So let me be clear, competition, of course, has much more to offer to other policies than meets the eye. We need to infuse competition in our industrial policy strategy, as these two are not antagonists. Embedding competition in public policy design, in particular in times in which industrial policy plays a central role, becomes a relevant contribute to the advancement of the single market. So one of the competition's key contribution to industrial policy is indeed contestability, which ill-designed regulation hinders too often. So knowing that as competition agencies we have the mission to promoting the single market, we need to persist in identifying the bottlenecks and the barriers to entry. So let me start with a concrete example, generative AI, which is now the new trend. So here in Portugal, the ADC among others, we have already identified the bottlenecks to competition along the generative AI stack. This must inform industrial policy, which should target these bottlenecks and tackle barriers to switching. So I see here a lot of room for cross-policy dialogue where competition must sit at the table and play a role in good industrial policy design. Because if Europe does its part in gearing regulation and wider public policies towards AI contestability, if Europe succeeds in promoting competition in this sector, the gains will span at a wider global level. However, if we fail to foster contestability in AI, tomorrow we will drag into a modern economy whose gates are controlled once again by yesterday's wardens. And we must not forget that we will do so under very different premises and world order, like the title of your conference last year, that looks nothing like what we have experienced until now. Looking at recent news of platforms abandoning fact-checking in the US, we may face the emergencies of a kind of a Washington effect towards deregulation. So just think again about the we-called executive order from President Trump on moving barriers to AI. So again, we have kind of a clash on the approach of the European approach to the American approach. And as Draghi pointed out, Europe needs regulation and a market environment that is startup-friendly, ensuring the reduction of competition bottlenecks and fostering innovation. Now moving to mergers, like you said, Draghi advocates for an assessment that increases the ability and the incentives to innovate. The EU Compass highlights that innovation and the intensity of competition in certain strategic sectors should be taken into account in merger assessment. And here we need to propel the learning curve with series of harm that are well calibrated to market dynamics and innovation. And we must deepen an innovation-centric approach to merger control. At the same time, while we must refine the current standards, we must not throw the baby away with the bathwater. Sometimes we do things right, and like you told Cristina, in Portugal, and let me give you the example, we recently prohibited a telecom merger, the acquisition by Vodafone of Novo, a small operator in Portugal. The target, which Vodafone claimed to be doomed to failure, ended up a few months after to be acquired by a disruptive entrant, Digi, a Romanian company. And the market reacted in Portugal, and prices really for consumers went down after the blocking this merger. So when it comes to telecoms, the truth is that we know from theory, from empirics, from our accumulated experience, that consumers, business, and the economy are best served with a competitive market environment. So we must keep steady in preventing harmful mergers in telecoms, like in other sectors of the economy. And we must be effective in conveying this message to society at large, that merger policy, like Martijn was saying, and Andreas, is not an obstacle to cross-border mergers, and that effective merger control is superior in all angles to a lenient approach. So there might be some different readings on the Draghi report's stance regarding telecom mergers. So maybe here the message and the recommendations it seeks to convey could benefit from clarification. Regardless, we must keep our resolve in ensuring effective merger control in telecom markets to the benefit of consumers, the economy as a whole. So now, just to wrap up, Cristina, and as once the President of the General Court, which is here last year, Mark van der Wood said, now the competition circle has expanded. And as competition enforcers, we must reach out to other policy stakeholders and materialize what I've been calling as competition 2.0, or a new legal ecosystem in competition. As agencies, we need to be stronger actors in good policy design to leverage the role of competition in promoting better policies more widely, similar to what Martijn was saying. So back to you. And
thank you so much. Thank you. Great messages. Let me just turn directly to Tomasz. As a leader of the Polish Competition Authority, of course, Poland has the presidency of the Council in this 6 months, in this period, and of course sets the agenda in many ways. Poland is in a bit of a unique situation. We're all kind of watching economic progress being made. The economic situation is promising in some respect. But why do, please react and give us your perspective on this debate. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, and thank you very much for organizing this event. Probably as a competition authority, we usually take part in the conferences where the topics are all the same and nothing refreshing. And when I see the topic, the perfect storm, yes, it's, you know, with the sentence, you never can afford to miss a good crisis. And the time of Trump for Europe, or the truth for Europe, it's also the question of leadership that Sven also mentioned. But our perspective as the CE countries also a little bit different, and we see this lack of perspective in the Draghi report. And we see that right now it's probably really the perfect time to discuss about this issue and to find out a way how to change the perspective in Europe, because in Europe, as we can probably all agree, it's really great place to live. It's a great place to raise kids, it's absolutely safe, but it's not the best place to make business anymore. And when arguing that it's because of the competition policy, it's too easy. I think it's too easy. Competition policy is not given as granted. It's also flexible, but the problem we have is much deeper. And I think that, of course, right now we are discussing the Draghi report, and we really fastly forgotten about the Letta report and all other reports that were before. And we are great, really great in Europe about discussing policies. And then we are making huge mistakes in implementation. And it's, I think that maybe a Trump administration is one of the best issues that we could afford, or it could be given to us to stop and think a moment about the future. Because before we had really, as also it was mentioned in the beginning, we have policies, a Green Deal that has been successfully implemented as an idea. But somehow, after the COVID, we were thinking about, reindustrialization of Europe. We were thinking about how many areas has to be changed, as we have already felt that we are too dependent over the China and even sometimes over the US, and nothing has changed. And when we are thinking about Green Deal, it's more ideologic and not as practical and realistic as we could think about this, because a Green Deal has nothing in common with reindustrialization of Europe. We are buying, for instance, heating pumps for 2 billion euros from China. We are buying solar panels for 23 billion euros from China, and the same with lithium-ion batteries. So somehow it's a great big donation program to China, which is developing really fast and is making even more independent. And right now we are thinking, okay, is it the problem with the merger policy in Europe that we are losing our competitiveness? it is not a problem of merger. Of course, if we have a strategy, if we have a policy that is highly connected to spendings, both public and private one, that has medium and long perspective over industrialization, then we can get back to this discussion of competition policy and think, okay, where we need to put a special attention to make it even more flexible, to support the change and to support the direction in which we want to grow. But right now, we have really great, inside the Draghi report, we have great analytics. I really love it. For instance, when there's discussion of the financial markets, it's really great. When you compare the spendings and the savings of households inside the US and European, in European we are focusing on the cash and banking deposits. You know, households has many 32% in Europe in cash and bank deposits. In the US it's 13%, and half of them are being invested via the investment funds and equity, so the stock exchange. And we have problem with the capital, and within the last decades we have done nothing in common. The problem, and a huge problem, is with the single market. And that's why I am coming back really often to letter report and some other reports also we have made in Poland over the last years, showing that the single market is still a work that has to be done, and not only about the services only, but also about the goods. You know, there are so many non-tariffs barriers inside the Europe that stop the entrepreneurship over the Europe, and we are not making anything about this. And still, in letter report, there's not so many places about non-tariff barriers over goods on the single market. And when we compare what's going right now in AI in the US and China, it's really great to have this discussion after, you know, two AI project, DeepSeek and Alibaba AI, that were shown from China. And we see that, okay, they have huge potential of growth, also because a huge domestic market. And they are protecting their companies also to boost the business and then make it global. And we see even right now that they are focusing on making their economy globally independent. And it's not only the high-tech industry we are thinking about, but also the pharma industry, even the food industry. And we have to rethink how we think also about our European place in the global economy. And I think that we have to start thinking about the policy, about something really real, how to reindustrialize the Europe, how, as you mentioned also, deregulate to make it more comfortable for business, to make better competition climate, to make better competition environment. And when we are thinking about all the issues concerning the merger control, the regulation over the competition policy, I believe personally that we need to be more flexible also over the enforcement. And if we deregulate, we need more enforcement tool to answer the questions and the challenges of the market. But still, let's start from the beginning, from the policy that is realistic. And then we can discuss openly and flexibly about the competition issues and the competition policies and the competition regulations, because we can be more flexible. But let's start from the proper ground this discussion. Thanks a lot.
Lots of great points. Thank you so much. I love the fact that you bring China back center stage, because this discussion is one that we need to confront. Industrial policy in China is responsible in a good way for them, for much of the predicament we find ourselves in. I very much like the fact that you also brought up rightly the letter report. Of course, we've been focusing on Draghi and letter, and of course some predecessor. Letter puts a lot of emphasis on institutional reform more than on spending, which is also the reason why my perception is that in Germany he is much preferred from some politicians to Draghi, because Draghi is a Southern European profligate who just wants to spend money. And then your call for both deregulation, but also the notion that in some sense, perhaps Trump 2.0 is something that we need to regard as a gift. Many have said this because, and this is something that Professor Adam Tooze will say this afternoon, I believe. So it's not as if this is snuck up on us, completely unexpected to some extent. We in Europe have been somewhat comforted by the blanket of, the Biden administration, all these people who are very nice to us and care about Europe. The Trump administration couldn't care less about Europe in general. And so I think now it's time to be on our own, okay? And that is a sentiment that, of course, in some dimension, I welcome. Now, let me turn to my one of my many partners in crime, Andreas Schwab, who last year with me on this stage was having a conversation on industrial policy that led to a further discussion that Rana sort of triggered on what is it that we in Europe are doing on competition, industrial policy, what's the role. So Andreas, of course, you have been one of the main architects in Parliament of digital regulation. You've been very involved in its development, but also, of course, in the debate now on its implementation. And it is an obvious statement that there is concern now about how much further will this go, with a US administration that is very obviously saying to those who go to genuflect in Mar-a-Lago, do your worst, I have your back, forget the Europeans, I don't really care. So how are we going to respond to that? How do you see it?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for giving me, for those that like football, at the end of this discussion, some penalty possibility here. I try to do it with calm. I would like to say that we should not overestimate these reports. I don't think that in Poland people discuss widely about Draghi and Letta, not in Germany neither. It's a way of making ourselves aware of the key policy changes that there might be. And Draghi has repeated the message that he did already before some years. Europe needs growth, whatever it takes. And I mean, that's the message that also competition policy has somehow to follow. And the question is, how can we do that in a time where there is a huge pressure from China on the one side, and now with the new Trump administration from the US on the other side? And I think the only solution that we have is that we are not now starting a moral arrogance game, believing that we know everything better. I think the economic pressure that the Americans will exert on Europe will be very strong. And if we don't really try to focus on competitiveness, we will have a problem. Now, I think we can already conclude, and I also want to drop the fact that in the competitive compass, there is one line on the DMA, at least one line, so you see it's not forgotten, that we try to do what we can to build on our own strengths. And Europe has a lot of strengths, and competition policy and competition authorities are there to help these strengths to grow further. But they cannot do everything. And I would like to start with that again, because you gave the title A Time of Truth for Europe. Our single market is still not a real market in a lot of respects. And therefore, a company like the one that Martijn has mentioned is making better if it's focusing on supply chains and tight contractual relations, because like that, the supplier from France is using all the strength of the French market and has not to deal with the problems that every European cross-border activity would bring. So we have, and that's the difference to the United States, we still have a lot to improve to make our market a real market that can compete. And why is that so difficult? Well, it's difficult because member states' interests and following on this, economic interests are hindering us of really watching on what we can achieve better together. And I think the European Commission is now really in this year in a need to make proposals to follow on these reports and to give this economic growth opportunity of the European Union a chance. Why do I believe that it's easier now than before? Well, we see in all areas that the Europeans, especially specific nations of Europe, don't matter anymore. If we are not trying to do it together, we have no chance. And therefore, these proposals of single market of telecoms as a growth potential for not only for 5G, 6G, but also all follow-on services like cloud and AI can be a tool where Europe can grow. But for sure, that growth will not be as before within 27 different national authorities, 27 different national companies. It will be a bit more imbalanced. But there is a second element that makes this imbalance more credible. I mean, it's obvious that our Polish friends feel the threat from Russia much stronger than the others. So there will also be some sort of defense imbalance where Europe has to be strong, but countries react differently to threats that there are. And so the threats, and I would also, let's say, nominate the Trump economic policy as a potential threat for the European Union. The threats will be a chance for the European Union to act better together and to make key decisions on how we can grow in common, not in every single member state in the same manner. And that is not easy because my fellow speakers here on this esteemed panel have not been mentioning that much, that for sure economic policy, competition policy in Europe has at the beginning always been some sort of balancing tool in between different economic interests of 27 member states. And I think with the threats that we are ahead of, it's clear that there is a common understanding that we will get out of this only together, and that can play down this idea of trying to balance it between 27 and really focus on economic growth potentials that we have. What is the risk? The risk is that we are looking to China in a way that we say, well, this is all because they have the market and they organize it better. No, also we in Europe could do similarly, maybe sometimes a bit more smartly. What is another risk? That we look to the Americans and say, well, they only care about money, we care about good life and so on. Well, good life is nice, but only if you can afford it. And we have to be very clear, we will not be able to afford the life that we have now if we don't manage to implement what the Draghi said, and this is that we need growth at any price. And on this, we have really to focus. I think all the policy elements that we have been discussing in the last conference and also in the last parliament, they are not gone, but they have to fit in a new strategy, and that's a growth strategy for Europe to survive. But I'm a strong believer that we can make it, and therefore we should call on the European Commission to start it.
So yes, you know, it's all of that, but you didn't answer the question I directly put to you. Where do you think the enforcement of digital regulation is going to go in this new world?
Well, this my colleagues here on this panel, they don't like that much, but for sure we need a common European strategy on how to face the digital threats that are about to happen. Therefore, we want a stronger commitment of the European Commission to make sure that cloud and AI are considered core platform services under the DMA, because there is so much potential that if we act now, the choice remains with the users and is not falling into the hands of those that can attract investment and can thereby then start to control the market. The best example is all the time with these little machines getting more and more powerful, that if you are as a user able to choose what AI system you want to integrate, there will be a real market. If it's the gatekeepers doing it for you, auto-installed, we miss an opportunity, and who will be profiting it? China and the US. So we have to be very smart and courageous on this. For that reason, it's also needed that our 27 national competition authorities push the European Commission in the right direction.
And you see that notwithstanding this general statement, what else can they possibly say? We are still enforcing that in the current environment. There is going to be a deceleration of that. How are we going to enforce that the pace continues?
well, we have done the laws, and in that time you cannot apply them. So the time of truth is now when they can be applied. And it's true that we are missing a bit of workforce to do it. It's true that we have also to show political leadership in going for difficult decisions, even though in the US, at least at this moment in time, it seems that the tech oligarchs have some good influence into the White House, even if they don't get an office there, if I'm right. So there is still a bit a situation to be developing, but we have to be firm on our values, but also aware of the fact that if we don't have economic growth, we will not be able to stand up.
Oh, that is a very good point that I certainly want to end on, which is we do worry hugely about power as it is exercised on us by tech platforms. And indeed, the change in administration has realized a reality which is much more serious for us in Europe in that dimension. Discourse, we spend the afternoon talking about that. But growth for Europe is essential because, as you said, we can have a nice life in cobbled street and walk down them, but as Draghi says, this economic and social contract is not sustainable in current circumstances unless things really change. So I don't want to end on a downbeat note, so I want to nonetheless give the opportunity maybe to others, to the other panelists to come back and make a final couple of remarks. Benoît, starting from you.
Yeah, thank you, Cristina, and this has been a great discussion. 3 very short points. First, Cristina, you're being too harsh on us when you say, when you describe the antitrust community as being, totally cut out from people and not caring about real people's needs, etc. And yes, Jonathan and Lina have done a great work in the US, but I can tell you that one of our last decisions in France was a 600 million euro fine on builders and retailers of household appliances. This was all over the place in the French press, and the same day I got an invitation to speak at the main TV's news program, and everyone reacted to that. And that was a good old cartel. That was not fancy digital enforcement. That was a good old cartel. So let's also come back to our fundamentals, and that will help us reconnect with people. First thing. Second. I think one of the main risks for us in the years to come will be politicization of antitrust and antitrust enforcement. And that's why we have to be part of the discussion. If we are not part of the discussion will come to us anyway, in a way we won't like. And you mentioned the UK. I think the UK provides a cautionary tale of how antitrust enforcement can be caught back by politics. And the CMA is a great institution, and I wish them the best in this new environment and framework, and I'm sure they can do a lot of good work. But I think it is a cautionary tale of what can happen, and it's good that we are protected in the EU by the ECN directive, but it's not enough that kind of supports our independence. But if we are not part of the discussion will come to us anyway. Third point, let's build on Europe's strength. I mean, we're being too bleak and negative on this panel. Europe has a great workforce. We have great innovation capacity, research laboratories. We have a high savings rate. It's just that we're not using it the right way. So let's start from our fundamentals, build on our strength, and there is a lot we can achieve.
Great. Andreas, do you want to add anything? A minute each?
Just briefly, I watched Richard Quest last night on CNN, and he proposed a drinking game that every time the Draghi report is mentioned in Davos, one would have to have a little shot. I think all Davos would be drunk. No, I just wanted to make you aware that if you look at the Draghi report and on what he says on competition law, you do not find a single word on weakening competition law. You do not find a single word on a relaxing merger control. Not a single word. What is the perception? Everybody thinks that now the new commission is in place, there will be a relaxation of merger rules in order to provide for bigger companies and for growth of companies. That is not in the letter report, that is not in the Draghi report. I just wanted to call on you to read it carefully, it is also instrumentalized in a way, and in a very wrong way. Having said that, just wanted to mention, I need to come back to that again and again. I just was at a meeting with a large number of CEOs from DAX 40 companies. And the evening before the meeting, all were asked to name the key obstacles to growth in Germany. And at the end of the conference, these 3 key words that had the majority were thrown on the wall. There was one big fat word in the middle, and that was debureaucratization. That was by far more important than anything else. Competition law was not even mentioned. It was not even in the list. So in a way, we're talking here as competition lawyers about problems that are not our field. This is a policy debate that needs to be taken outside the world of competition. We have other problems in Europe than a lack of competition, than weak competition, than too strong competition. That is not the point. We need to talk about, we need to go back to the roots in a certain way and do the right things. That might be very conservative. I call it ordoliberal. So let us go back to our ordoliberal world in a way, and you will see giving back this freedom to companies to innovate, to compete, to work, to do things that will bring a tremendous growth. And this is, by the way, exactly what the US do. That's exactly what they do. And maybe we should take a close look at this, and not so much at China, and look at the industrial policy that is happening there. That is not our way forward.
Wonderful. A call to return to ordoliberal past is something I understand and in some extent support. Martijn, you have any 30-second comment?
Yeah, I think going back to the ordoliberal past also means having a strong focus on economic power, and also means ways to rein in economic power. And we shouldn't forget that what democracy is for political power is competition for economic power. And therefore, we shouldn't fall in the trap. Deregulation cannot lead to more economic power. That is not good for consumers, and that is not good for businesses. So I like the plea for deregulation and less rule and less bureaucracy, but let's not throw away competition.
Very good. I think we need to end on this note. Even though we've run out of time, I think that this is a note that we can all thank the speakers for. I think it was a great discussion, and join me in thanking them now. Okay, this is not the coffee time, so we will just swap the panel and I'll stay in place. Thank you so much.
Now you can talk about industrial.
Yeah, I can.
There's nothing to be done. Cheers, Herr Schwab.
Thank you. It was great.